He was the strongest demon king in history, but after causing too much damage and falling into debt, he's fired by the elders and forced to earn money in the human world. The story begins as we learn about the fight between the light and dark continents, which has been going on for hundreds of years. The humans on the light continent launched countless crusades to eliminate the Dark Clan, but they couldn't break through the halls guarded by the 7 demon kings. The most powerful among them is the monarch of the first hall named Merlin, and we see him writing his weekly report, but he can't focus because the battle is right outside his palace. His sister Lilith uses her charm magic to make the humans fight each other, but one of the knights suddenly attacks her and sends her crashing to the ground. The humans stop fighting each other, and the knight introduces herself as Alice, the 233rd hero of the kingdom. Lilith realizes her magic didn't work on her because she's a girl, and she starts teasing her, telling her she's cute. Alice pushes her back and rushes to attack her, but Lilith kicks her away. She struggles to land a hit, and Lilith mocks her for being weak, so Alice decides to show her true powers. Lilith attacks her, but she's shocked as her whip made from dragon tendons breaks upon touching Alice's sword. She notes that the Holy Sword Light Anthem can't be touched by dark creatures like her, and she attacks Lilith with her magic. She manages to block it, but Alice suddenly rushes in and captures her. The soldiers start cheering for Alice, but Merlin hears the noise and wonders what's happening outside. Alice asks her master Sage to order her to attack the Demon King's palace, but he turns down her request and summons a giant monster whale. He calls it the ultimate weapon of humanity, since it can destroy everything with a single blow. Alice thinks they should only eliminate the Demon King, but he believes all demons deserve to die, so he wants to wipe them out. He knows how evil the Demon King is, because he's the only person who ever survived after facing him. He launches his ultimate attack to obliterate the demons, but Merlin suddenly arrives to protect them and accidentally lands on Alice. Lilith hugs him, telling him they bullied her, while Alice tells him to watch his step while he's landing. He wonders who she is, so Lilith tells him she's a useless hero, but he knows that Lilith lost to her, so she explains that she just got careless. Alice wishes to fight him, but he sends her flying with just a flick of his finger. Sage calls him his nemesis, but Merlin doesn't even remember him, so he mentions that he was the only person to ever survive after fighting against him. Merlin finally remembers him begging for his life, and notes that he let Sage escape because he promised to sacrifice his men to him. Everyone's shocked hearing this, but Sage explains that it isn't true, saying he's there for humanity's glory and justice. He draws out the magical energy from all his soldiers and fires a powerful energy beam, but Merlin uses his sword to deliver a devastating attack, which kills the monster in an instant. Sage begs for forgiveness and blames Alice for the attack, but they suddenly hear a bell, which freaks Merlin out as he realizes that the weekly meeting has started. He runs toward his palace, but Alice stops him, so he mentions that even though she's too weak for him, he'll use his Dark Blade Vortex because she came all the way to fight him. He unleashes a destructive sword attack, and Alice tries to block it with her barrier, but she gets overwhelmed, and it cuts through the ground. At the meeting, they're all disappointed at Merlin because he has the worst performance out of all the Demon Kings. He mentions that he defeated the most crusades and destroyed millions of humans, but they tell him he isn't making money for the palace. They explain that every time he goes fighting, he causes serious damage to the Land of Darkness, so his total debt has reached 66 trillion yen, and they ask him to pay it immediately. Merlin tries to sneak out of the palace, but Lilith thinks he's playing hide and seek. He tells her the demon realm is too small for him, so it's time for him to explore the outside world, thinking his absence will make everyone realize how important he is. She wonders if he was fired, but he tells her it was totally his own decision, and the elders tried to stop him. He mentions that he's leaving because of his curse, which shrinks his heart if he doesn't fight strong opponents, so he must find them in the Kingdom of Light. But she thinks he has no skill other than being a demon king, so he won't survive in the outside world. She wishes to accompany him, but he notes that he must pay 66 trillion for all the damages he caused if he stays there. So she quickly jumps back and wishes him luck in earning enough to pay back his debt. As he leaves, she thinks that even though he's the strongest demon king, he's still an idiot who will return after he fails in the outside world. So she thinks he'll come back crying, but hopes the experience will help him grow as a person. Meanwhile, Alice notes that if it weren't for her mithril armor and light anthem, she wouldn't have survived. But she realizes that Lilith is approaching, so she plays dead, and Lilith thinks it's a miracle that her body is still intact. But she doesn't want to let her beautiful face turn to dust, so she decides to take her to the palace and keep her as a collectible. She tries to pick her up, but she's too heavy, so she decides to just take her head, but Alice moves to dodge the attack. Lilith wants to have a rematch, but Alice knows she's in no condition to fight, so she tries to escape, and Lilith orders her wolves to chase her. Meanwhile, Merlin reaches the sea, which the humans cross to reach the demon realm, and he realizes he used too much force with the blade strike earlier, because it damaged all the ships. He knows that demons can't swim, so he thinks he has no choice but to return, but a small boat suddenly floats towards him, and he decides to row himself across the sea. Meanwhile, Alice continues to run from the wolves, and she remembers how her master told her she isn't ready to face the demons. But she didn't want to become like her master, who did nothing but stay on the snowy mountain, so she insisted on going on an adventure. She starts crying, as she realizes that the outside world is scary, and she thinks she needs to work on her skills when she gets back. She takes out one of the wolves, and feels relieved, because only one elite tier beast is left, but it suddenly transforms into its final form, which freaks her out. She struggles to defend herself, and thinks she won't survive, but Merlin suddenly stops the wolf. He thinks she would make the perfect slave, so he tells the wolf named Fatty to tell Lilith that Alice belongs to him, which freaks her out. He tells her he saved her life, so she must serve as his slave to return the favor. He carries her to the boat, and she tries to resist, but she's no match for him, and he tells her to start rowing. Alice dreams about defeating Merlin, and she's about to marry a prince, but Merlin wakes her up, telling her to get to work. She thinks about getting her revenge one day, and as she gets lost in her thoughts, she starts rowing aggressively. She notices him standing firm despite the strong currents, but she soon realizes he's taking support from a wooden board. After some time, she smells the delicious food he's cooking, so she gets distracted. But he mentions that she's a useless hero, which upsets her, so she stops rowing, telling him they'll simply drift to death. He tells her she'll be rewarded if she works well, and even though she's against having that food, she isn't able to resist it. She apologizes to her master, saying a demon king shouldn't be able to cook such delicious food, so it's against the laws of nature. The sharks are attracted to the smell of food, and she tells him to stop roasting, but he ignores them, so she tells him the sea is home to more dangerous creatures. He points towards her back, and she's scared seeing a shark up close, but he sends it back with his conqueror's haki. He thinks he's the most dangerous creature in the sea, but she notes that she was talking about the sea monster, which is the most terrifying predator in the sea. She reveals that even their army had to smear the holy dragon's poop on their ships, just to avoid its attack, and he realizes that it's the reason why the army smells so weird. But she notes that the holy dragon's poop is a precious treasure, because the holy dragon disappeared, so its poop is more precious than gold. She thinks he must have never heard about the holy dragon, but he takes out a contract crystal used for binding demonic beasts. He opens a portal, through which he contacts Bucky, thinking he no longer needs to leave, because he can earn the extra money by selling its poop. Alice can't believe the holy dragon turned into a pet, so he explains that he defeated it, and made it his pet. But she's still in shock, because the holy dragon is supposed to be the strongest being in the world. He thinks Bucky will find him through the crystal, and take him back to the palace, but it suddenly slips out of his hand and falls into the sea. Merlin tells Alice to continue working, but he notices that all the fish around them have suddenly disappeared, so he thinks a dangerous predator must be nearby. The sea monster appears before them, and Alice asks him to chase it away, but he mentions that he can't swim. She wonders why he's acting so strong when he can't even swim, so she realizes that she must deal with it herself. She jumps to attack it, but her sword can't pierce through its skin, and she loses all hope. Merlin tells the monster to become his new slave, and carry him across the sea, but it rejects his offer, and shoots water at him. So he uses his sword to attack it, killing it in an instant, and Alice can't believe how powerful he is. They finally reach the shore, and Merlin notes that they only made it because he's such a good leader. He thinks Alice is a useless slave because she lacks strength and brains, so he decides to part ways with her. But before he leaves, he tells her to take off her armor because he wants to earn money by selling it. Alice appears in the court, where she's held responsible for the death of her fellow soldiers because she wasn't strong enough to defeat Merlin. She's stripped of her status as a hero in order to pay 50 million gold since she lost the precious mithril armor. After a year, we see Alice fighting against pirates, but they think she's too weak to defeat them. She frees the girl they kidnapped and tells her to stop worrying because she'll engage them until backup arrives. She shoots ice to freeze the captain's feet, but as she tries to finish him off, she's blocked by another pirate who pushes her back. She tells them they won't be able to lay a hand on the girl as long as she's alive, but they just laugh at her. They explain that she's just an elite tier hero while they're at the holy tier, so she can't do anything to them. They prepare to attack her, but Merlin suddenly lands on top of them. He mentions that he couldn't wait for them to complete their show since his curse would have activated. They think he's weak because they can't sense his magic, so they decide to fight him. He uses his sword to defeat them, but his attack creates a massive explosion, which destroys their ship, as well as the reinforcement ships sent to rescue the mayor's daughter. Alice can't see his face, so she considers him her hero and starts praising him, but he leaves before she can learn about his identity. After that, a reporter named Bella mentions that the Queen considers Merlin a wanted criminal. She reveals that no one knows his real name, and they've given him the title of Nightblade, but Alice refuses to accept it since she considers him as the real hero. She's irritated that the TV is still showing the interview, and she's happy that she was able to collect 10,000 gold, but she realizes that she still has a long way to go before she can clear her debt. She recalls how Merlin ruined her life and hits the table out of frustration, but she accidentally spills water on her next mission contract. She notices that the wanted criminal looks like Merlin, but she thinks that a demon king couldn't be a freeloader. She realizes she's late for her carriage, but she starts hugging her poster of Nightblade, asking him to bless her and curse the Demon King. Meanwhile, Merlin sees his wanted poster, but he isn't happy that he only has a bounty of 5,000 gold. He realizes he was careless because he wasted all the money he got from selling the armor, but he thinks everyone should be honored if he dines at their place instead of calling him a freeloader. He finally sees a village, but two bandits try to rob him, telling him they'll be punished if they don't take something to their master. They ask him to hand over his sword, but he warns them that they'll die the moment he takes it out. The bandits laugh at him, and one of them uses his knife to instantly peel off an apple, asking Merlin if he's afraid. But Merlin uses his sword to cut him into pieces, and he takes the apple, while the second bandit runs away. He turns into a goblin, so Merlin realizes that they used transformation magic to look like bandits. The goblin tells the king that a human killed his companion, but it makes him happy. We learn that they disguised themselves as bandits so that they could provoke the humans to break the peace treaty, and the king orders his subjects to attack a human village. Merlin sends a letter to Lilith, telling her he's living a luxurious life and that everyone loves him. So he won't return to the Demon King's palace unless the old men apologize to him, but she knows he's just bluffing. He tries to leave a hotel without paying, and the owner recognizes him as the infamous freeloader who has been causing trouble in the south. He asks everyone to help him catch Merlin, but he manages to escape. He notes that he didn't want to cause trouble, but a boy named Henry suddenly appears before him. He instinctively holds his sword, so Henry wonders if he's performing, telling Merlin he'll reward him if he puts on a good show. But Merlin can't take out his sword, because it would kill Henry and destroy the village. So he just tries to trick him, but Henry gets angry and calls him a useless bum. So Merlin becomes angry and throws away Henry's ice cream, making him cry. Alice also arrives in the village, and the adventurers tell her it's an honor to travel with a hero, but she mentions that she no longer has that title, so they wonder what happened. As she's about to explain, a man starts shouting about a new book, which is about the secret romance between the Demon King and the female hero. She becomes embarrassed because she thinks it's about her adventure with Merlin, and the man notes that millions of copies have been sold, so she falls into despair. The adventurers discuss how they will deal with the goblins, but seeing them talk about their marriage scares her, because she thinks they'll die during the mission. The girl named Priest wishes her luck on her mission, and she notes that they don't mind the cross-species romance of Alice and the Demon King. She looks at the wanted poster and wonders why a freeloader has a huge bounty on his head, but she thinks it will be an easy job. Merlin goes to a nearby inn and enjoys delicious food, but the owner catches him when he tries to sneak out. She notes that the restroom is in the opposite direction, so he mentions that he's looking for a job, but she asks him if he has any skills relevant to the inn. He shows his dancing and singing skills, which impresses everyone, and she decides to hire him, telling him his base pay is 1 gold, and he also gets a 15% commission on drink sales. He wonders how she can afford such good pay, so she tells him they run 2 shifts. Everything's normal during the day shift, but at night, they serve plenty of female customers, so he needs to make the environment lively. She introduces herself as Martha, and he comes up with the nickname Daisy for his night shift. She mentions that she'll deduct the cost of his meal from his first salary, and she introduces him to her son Henry, who calls him a freeloader, but she hits him for being rude. She tells him to show Merlin the guest room, and on their way, Merlin tries to bribe him so that he won't tell her about their first encounter. He offers to teach Henry his blade strike so that he can fight holy tier opponents, but he doesn't trust Merlin. He notes that only a talented person like the Nightblade can defeat a holy tier opponent, so Merlin tells him he's the Nightblade, but Henry refuses to believe him. Meanwhile, the adventurers struggle to defeat the goblins because they weren't expecting to fight an entire army of them. They realize they have no other option, so they try to escape, but they get captured by the goblin chancellor named Gia. Merlin starts working at the inn, and he focuses entirely on the female customers to win their hearts, but the male customers are insecure because of him. Martha is pleased with his performance because he increased their sales, and she believes he must have excelled in his previous jobs as well. She thinks his nickname Daisy might look odd in the newspaper, but he fears it will lead to more embarrassment, so he tells her they don't need ads. Henry interrupts them, saying he's just a freeloader who feeds off women's money, and tells him to stay away from his mother. Alice can't find her target, but she suddenly hears Henry hitting the tree, and realizes he's angry at a handsome freeloader, so she shows him the poster. He notes that it doesn't look like the freeloader he knows, who has been conning women at their tavern to increase their revenue. She thinks he's just a workaholic, but several men suddenly approach her and offer her a reward if she takes care of Merlin, since their women are trapped by his charm. Alice goes to the inn, where she's surprised to see a large number of women, since it's just a small town. She sees Merlin, and realizes he's the freeloader from her poster, so she decides to catch him. But she recalls that according to the reports, he always runs away, so she tries to get close to him first. She accidentally enters the stage, and he thinks she also wants to be a part of his performance. But they soon learn of each other's true identity, so she tries to kill him, but he dodges all of her attacks. She starts crying, telling him she's been living a miserable life after he left her, so the ladies think he's a terrible person for abandoning her. After that, Alice asks Merlin to return her treasure, but he reveals that he has already sold it. She mentions that he ruined her life, so she'll arrest him if he doesn't return the armor, but he reminds her she's no match for him. She realizes that she must live with her debt of 50 million gold, which surprises him, because he only has a debt of a few thousand coins after freeloading for a year. She explains her situation to him, telling him she had to get a job in the Adventurers Guild, and fight holy tier opponents to pay off her debt. But he gets excited, asking her how he can become an adventurer, so she tells him he'll need a referral. He asks her for her referral, because he always wanted to become an adventurer, but she turns him down. Meanwhile, Henry walks around the city, but the guards tell him to go home, because Martha will be upset. He mentions that he doesn't want to see the freeloader, and the adventurer who left to defeat the goblins appears. He asks the guards to open the gates, but they tell him they aren't allowed to open it at night. He notes that his friends are dead, and he's heavily wounded, so they open the gate. But it turns out to be a trap, and the goblins rush into the village. He asks Gia to free his fiancée as part of their agreement, but she explains that he has no right to negotiate with her, because he's just a slave. Alice wonders why the Demon King wants to become an adventurer, and she's upset that she can no longer get her reward, because no one can capture him. The goblins attack the inn, but Merlin realizes they aren't customers, so he kicks them out, which impresses the ladies. Martha worries for her son, so she rushes out to find him, and leaves the tavern under his care. As more goblins appear, he quickly takes care of them, and continues working as if nothing happened. He realizes that he won't get paid if anything happens to Martha, so he goes off to find her, while she asks everyone if they've seen Henry. A man tells her he saw him near the gate and warns her that there are goblins everywhere, but she goes looking for him anyway. She calls out his name, which draws the monster's attention, and they take her away. Henry realizes she's in trouble, so he tries to help her, but he's so scared that he can't move. Meanwhile, Merlin walks around the village and thinks it's as chaotic as the Dark Realm. He runs into goblins and wants to avoid fighting them since they're so weak that they can't help him with his curse. But they still attack him, so he cuts them into pieces. Alice sees him and thinks he's working with the goblins, but he explains that he'll never team up with such low-ranked creatures. She notes that if he isn't with them, he should help her defeat them, but he explains that he doesn't care because he isn't a resident of the village. She reminds him that he wants to join the guild and tells him adventurers must protect the village, but he doesn't want to do it unless she pays him. She notes that she doesn't have money, so he tells her to step aside because he needs to find Martha. Alice thinks she can save the village alone, and she uses her ice magic to freeze the goblins. Gia observes her and thinks Alice won't be able to stop her if she lands a surprise attack, but Alice shocks her with a strong kick. She tells Gia to leave the village, but she mentions that despite being an elite tier, Alice can't defeat all of them. Gia orders the goblins to capture her, but a boy suddenly collapses before her and tells her about Merlin. She uses her magic to see how the goblins were killed and realizes that her army is no match for Merlin, so she orders them to retreat. The villagers look for their family, while a man named Johnson tries to advertise his services as a personal guard. They all ask him to save their loved ones, but he thinks they're already dead, so he tells them to focus on the future instead. Alice arrives with the adventurer who asked the guards to open the gates, and he tells them the goblins took their loved ones to their cave. One of the soldiers recognizes him and calls him a traitor, but Alice defends him, saying his fiancée and comrades were captured, so he was forced to work with the goblins. Johnson asks her who she is, so she introduces herself as the 233rd hero, and everyone starts talking about her. Johnson tries to turn them against her, so she kicks him away and decides to attack the cave alone. Henry decides to join her, thinking the villagers are all cowards, but he accidentally trips over a goblin and becomes scared as he sees the bodies. He goes to take his father's sword so that he can use it to save his mother. The unconscious goblins suddenly wake up, and he tries to attack them, but they easily defeat him. They're about to finish him off, but Merlin arrives to save him and tells them they're making him angry because they're the reason why he needs to work overtime. Henry tries to leave with the sword, and Merlin tells him to stay home, but he notes that he needs to save his mother. Merlin thinks he's always causing trouble, but he remembers the time he had to fight to save his sister and decides to help Henry. He notes that it will be the first time he lifts his sword for a human, but he doesn't know where the goblin's cave is. He hears a group of humans planning to rescue their loved ones in the goblin's lair, so he decides to join them. He volunteers to be their leader, telling them he's a strong warrior, but they think he isn't fit to lead them. Henry tries to tell them he's a capable fighter, but he doesn't want to explain himself, so he decides to appoint Johnson as their leader instead. They're glad that he'll lead the rescue, because they think he's a reliable warrior, but he's too scared to face the goblins. Alice sneaks into the cave by distracting the goblins, while Gia tells the Goblin King about their raid. He praises her for capturing humans, but she tells him she encountered 2 strong fighters in the village. She claims that she could have defeated them, but she led them to the cave instead, so that he could enjoy watching them suffer. They finally arrive outside the goblin's cave, and Johnson starts shivering in fear, while Henry rushes to fight the goblins, but Merlin stops him because he knows it's a trap. Gia activates her fire barrier and tells them to surrender if they want to live. Merlin walks through it, which worries Henry, but he notes that the heat is nothing compared to the magma under his house. Gia notes that even holy tier warriors can't break through it, so the humans don't stand a chance, but Merlin suddenly appears behind her, telling her he walked right through it. She wonders who he is, but he can't reveal his true identity, so he tells her he's Daisy, and he manages to charm all the goblins. He grabs her hand and asks her to just hand over Martha, but she refuses and tries to burn him with her magic. But he easily stops her flames, so she realizes that he's been hiding his true powers. She uses her ultimate move to surround him with her flames, but he sneezes and sends all the goblins flying. She wonders if he's a monster, but he just flicks her, which sends her crashing into the mountain. The fire disappears, and Johnson can't believe Merlin was able to defeat Gia because she's an elite tier mage. And as he enters the cave, they notice that his silhouette is similar to that of the Nightblade. Meanwhile, Alice frees the prisoners, but she's spotted by goblins, so she tells Priest to lead everyone out of the cave while she handles them. She quickly defeats them, but accidentally enters the king's hall, where she sees him waiting for her. He reveals that Gia told him she'll deal with one of the attackers, and she'll send the other one to him, since he hasn't fought a strong opponent in ages. She realizes he's a holy tier fighter, and thinks he focuses on brute strength, but he surprises her with his speed, and shatters her ice shield. Merlin tries to find Martha, but he gets lost in the cave, because there are multiple paths. The Goblin King tries to grab Alice, but she jumps back and cuts his arm, which impresses him, because he knows that his previous hit broke her bones. He thinks she's just an ant compared to him, but she mentions that her master taught her that underestimating an opponent can be fatal. He manages to capture her, but she uses her giant ice sword to break free. She lands a combination attack, and thinks it's over, but he reveals that he was just pretending to be dead, since he likes to see his opponents fall into despair. He heals his wounds, and transforms his body before punching her away. Meanwhile, Priest and the others try to escape from the cave, but they soon find a figure in front of them, so they think they're surrounded by goblins. But it turns out to be Merlin, who's happy to see Martha, and he asks her to give him a bonus for working overtime. She grabs his arm and runs, because they don't have much time, but he stops and instantly takes out the goblins chasing after them. She asks him to save Alice, since she helped them escape, but he wonders if he should help her or leave her. Martha promises to triple his salary if he saves her, so he decides to do it. Priest tells him to be careful, and advises him against entering a hall filled with gold coins, because the Goblin King is a holy tier opponent. He storms off, thinking he'll get rich after defeating a powerful enemy, but they think he's just worried about Alice. He knocks out several goblins on his way to the king's hall, and blasts through the entrance, but he ignores the king and starts looking at all the gold. He cuts off the goblin's arm, and grabs Alice, but he wonders if Martha will reduce his bonus, since Alice is injured. She asks him about the others, so he tells her they're safe, and that he'll get her out of there after he defeats the Goblin King. The Goblin King pretends to be hurt, and he suddenly regenerates his lost arm, but Merlin shows no reaction, so he wonders what's wrong with him. Merlin notes that he knows a troublemaker with a similar sense of humor, but she's much prettier than him. The Goblin King realizes he's strong, so he decides to go all out, and begins to attack him from all directions, but Merlin easily blocks all of his attacks. The Goblin King asks for his name, but Merlin thinks he doesn't deserve to know it, so he just tells him he's called Daisy. The Goblin King prepares to use his ultimate technique, so Merlin becomes excited. He offers to make Merlin his chancellor if he swears loyalty to him, but he laughs at his courage to make such an offer, telling him to go all out. So he uses his ultimate goblin's hammer skill, but Merlin easily blocks it, and Alice sees him from behind, realizing he's the Nightblade. He takes out his sword, and the Goblin King recognizes it as the legendary sword Vortex, which only the Demon King of Pride can draw. Merlin defeats him with a single blow, but he forgets to control his attack, so the entire cave starts collapsing. He wonders if he should save Alice or grab the treasure, and his conscience reminds him that she can refer him to the guild, so he ends up deciding to save her. He creates an opening to leave the cave, and everyone's glad they made it out alive. Henry considers him a hero, and thanks him for saving everyone, but he starts crying over the lost treasure, while Martha thinks he's just worried about Alice. Merlin sees that Alice is badly injured, but he needs her to recommend him to the guild, so he decides to heal her. He takes off her clothes, but Martha enters, and thinks they're about to get intimate, so she quickly rushes out with Henry, telling them to continue. He covers Alice with his saliva, since it has a healing effect on the opposite gender, and as she begins to heal, she starts dreaming, and he realizes it's because of the saliva, so he thinks he won't be able to enjoy a peaceful night. Alice wakes up the next morning, and everyone rushes to check on her. She doesn't remember what happened after she was defeated by the Goblin King, so Priest tells her she should thank Merlin, because he was the one who saved her. She thinks they should reconcile since they're old friends, but Alice tells her they're rivals. Everyone thanks Alice for saving them earlier, but she mentions that it's part of her job. Bella interviews Johnson, who brags about how he led the villagers to fight the goblins, but he becomes nervous when he sees Merlin. She asks him about the goblin invasion, but Merlin thinks it was just a few goblins, so she wonders if it was just a minor conflict exaggerated by the villagers. Martha tells him Alice is looking for him, and he thinks she wants to thank him, but when he goes to her room, she suddenly attacks him. She thinks he took advantage of her because he took off her clothes, and the priest next door heard weird sounds throughout the night. But he explains that it was because of his saliva, which healed her wounds and made her dream of him. She finally understands the situation and thanks him for saving her, but he mentions that he lost all of the treasure because of her, so she reminds him that it was all stolen. He asks for her help to become an adventurer, so she agrees to refer him, but she mentions that it would make them even. Martha and the others give them farewell gifts, and Henry tells Merlin he wants to become his student in the future. Martha teases Merlin and Alice about getting married, but Alice insists that they aren't a couple. Meanwhile, the goblins realize their king is dead, and think they should migrate to the south, so that Daisy will never reach them. A woman suddenly appears before them, and she mentions that she has the third key to the Legion of Hell, but she notes that she must kill all of them, because she doesn't want anyone to know about it. Merlin and Alice reach the guild, and he notes that the building is small, but he's excited to be an adventurer. He sees the notice board with the available contracts, and asks Alice if she's an adventurer or a part-time worker, because they're mostly ordinary jobs. The receptionist notices them, and she wonders if Alice came for another mission. She knows she can't introduce him with his real name, so she mentions that he's Daisy, which makes the receptionist wonder if he's her boyfriend. So she quickly shows the wanted poster, and notes that she came to collect the reward. He's shocked hearing this, but she tells him a criminal can't become an adventurer, so he must pay his debt first. The receptionist named Lou tells her that even though it follows the rules, she'll only get 10% of her actual reward. Lou deducts the money she owes the guild, and gives her 50 gold coins, which makes her sad, but Merlin tries to steal them, saying he was the one who turned himself in. She tells him she lost thousands of gold because of him, so he reminds her of how he saved her life multiple times. Lou notes that they should test his level, but Merlin thinks they shouldn't waste time, telling her to give him the highest title. A man named Arnold arrives, and he thinks Alice is dating Merlin, which makes him sad, because she rejected his proposal. She tells him she isn't dating Merlin, but he still takes out his sword, and challenges Merlin to a duel, telling him the winner can date her. She yells at them to stop, but Arnold still rushes in and attacks Merlin, who sends him flying into the ceiling. Another adventurer named Hobbs tells Alice that her boyfriend is just as strong as her, and Merlin thinks he's mocking him. But she notes that it's a compliment, because their guild only has a few strong adventurers. Merlin mentions that he'll help them raise the overall level of the guild, but a man named Claude suddenly arrives, and everyone falls silent. He checks his power, and the orb reveals that he's a saint-level fighter. Lou tells him he passed the test, and everyone's shocked because he's as powerful as the guild master. Merlin thinks he'll shock everyone with his results, and that they'll worship him after he takes the test. But the device fails to measure his power, so Lou tells him he can't become an adventurer. Alice wonders if he's hiding his strength, but he isn't sure what's happening. She offers to prove that he's strong enough to become an adventurer, but Lou tells her she can't break the rules. He notes that a highly skilled warrior like him is rare, and even the Devil's Messenger asked him to lead the Hell's Legion, but he turned down the offer. Everyone starts laughing at him, but he offers to fight the strongest person in the guild to prove his strength. The guild master arrives, saying he can't ignore his challenge, and he takes him to a hall. Merlin asks him if he wants to give up, thinking it will help him keep his reputation. But the guild master thinks he's arrogant, telling him he has already defeated countless people who challenged him. He explains that Merlin doesn't need to defeat him, because he'll allow him to become an adventurer if he shows potential, but he notices that Merlin isn't even listening. The old man tells him to go all out, so Merlin uses his blade strike, which shocks him and damages everything around them. The adventurers think their master went too far, thinking Merlin must be scared to death, but he surprisingly returns unscathed. The guild master allows him to join the guild, and he's so scared that he wets his pants. Merlin comes up with a plan to get rich as an adventurer, and he tells Alice he'll give her a 10% share from the mission rewards, but she doesn't want to work with him. Merlin thinks he doesn't need Alice, but he soon runs out of money, and since he has nowhere else to go, he sneaks into her house. She catches him, and thinks he was spying on her, but he mentions that she has nothing worth spying on. He tells her it's hard living alone, so he'll stay with her and only charge her 1,000 gold for his protection. But she kicks him out, so he starts creating a commotion, which grabs everyone's attention, and they think Alice kicked out her boyfriend. She realizes he'll ruin her reputation, so she takes him inside, and he offers to protect her for free if she lets him stay. She tries to hit him, but he easily evades her attacks and enters her room. He lies on her bed, and when she tries to remove him, he tells her it's too small for both of them. So he wraps her in the blanket and makes her fall asleep. The next morning, Alice goes to the guild, but she's tired from sleeping on the floor. Merlin arrives, and he asks her why she didn't wake him up, so everyone starts gossiping that they're living together. Arnold also appears, and he notes that his duel with Merlin wasn't fair, so they should have a best of 3. But instead of fighting, they should see who can complete an A-rank mission. Merlin notes that even though he isn't interested in winning her over, he can't ignore a commission since he's an adventurer. He tells Lou he wishes to take the commission, but she tells him he can't accept the mission without a mentor because his level is too low. So he tells Alice to join him, but Arnold also asks her to join his team instead, telling her he already hired Claude to be a part of his team. Merlin thinks he's the ideal choice, but she decides to join Arnold's team. Everyone feels bad for Merlin because she abandoned him for the Duke's son, but he sees Hobbs and tricks him into forming a team. After that, Hobbs wakes up in a carriage and wonders where they are, so Merlin tells him about the mission, but he gets scared because he's just a mage and Merlin is a rookie. He tells Hobbs to stop worrying because he'll take care of everything, but Hobbs suddenly sees the Knights of the Duke of Roses. But Merlin doesn't know them, so Hobbs mentions that they have a higher status than Arnold's father. A knight named Carl asks for directions, so Hobbs tells him it's across the mountain, but they'll need to walk because their carriage can't go there. Carl becomes angry, thinking he wants the Duke's daughter Cecilia to walk on such a muddy path, so Merlin wonders if she's a cripple. Carl tries to whip him, but Merlin grabs onto it and pulls him off his horse. Hobbs tells him to calm down and end the fight by apologizing, but he thinks Carl should be the one to apologize. They suddenly see a stampede of burning rhinos approaching, so Carl orders his soldiers to protect the carriage. Merlin thinks the rhinos are running away from something, and one of them is about to crash into Carl, but Merlin suddenly lifts it with his single finger. But that's where this video ends. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.